Topic, franchise sales process, design, and execution. And that's one of our core businesses. We probably design anywhere from 12 to 20 processes in a given calendar year. And, for the process, to me, I might define it a little differently and a little bit more broadly than people on the phone, which we'll get into in a second. Okay. But before we get into process, I want to get into the buyer journey, because if your franchise sales process is inconsistent with how people buy, then the process doesn't work, right? So we want to make sure that we're designing with the buyer in mind. So one of the big ahas I had early in my career, I heard this quote from Zig Ziglar. He was talking at an IFA event. That's got to be almost close to 30 years ago. And he had made a quote in one of his books that stuck with me, is that people don't buy drills, they buy holes. And that one quote got me thinking and actually changed the way I design. So let's use the chat box, or actually there's enough people, just go ahead and shout out there. And I had made this assertion, see if you guys remember, right? So when people are buying a franchise, what are they really buying?
A version of their life in the future that's better than what it is today.
So in that ballpark, very good. So some version, okay, or future. So I'll call it desired future to put paraphrase what Leslie's saying. Very good. What else? They're buying a desired lifestyle. That's right. And that's right. So when you talk, let's play that idea out a little bit. I would verbalize it a little differently. So as opposed to desired lifestyle, what are they really buying? They're buying their own narrative, right? They're buying a story, their story, how their lives, careers, portfolios, finances will predictably change in the future if we did business together. They're buying a story. Okay. So that aha really kind of started me on a different trajectory in my career. So I knew if that's the case, which I believe it to be, then we all have to learn how to tell storytelling. And that added a whole new level of complexity, I think, into design work and content strategy. Because we'd abdicated, and I think we still continue to abdicate brand story to ad agencies, PR firms, and content producers who've actually never worked a lead in their entire life. Okay. And then we're counting on them to tell our brand story through content streams, through PR releases, our website design, lead nurturing. Which I think, which we talked about, as a fundamental mistake. I think we make almost universally across franchising, that the people who actually know how and why people buy don't know how to tell a brand story. And the people that know how to tell brand stories never worked the lead before in their lives, creating pretty inefficient disconnect and siloing. So let's assume we talk about also, how do you design? And what are people buying, right? So we're buying their story, right? So their story is all around perceived value, right? So, what value are you bringing to the table as a franchisor? And if you haven't gone through the exercise of sitting down with a piece of paper and laying out your entire value proposition, every statement of value that you would bring to a franchise candidate. Now, when I talk about value proposition, I'm not talking about your consumer value proposition. In other words, what value are the consumers getting out of your product and service? I'm strictly talking about your value proposition as a franchise investment opportunity. So if a franchisee or investor did business with you, what do they get out of the deal? What's in it for them, predictably, right? And just kind of flush that out, right? And then how do you know a deal is going to get done? I think the best predictor of successful recruitment is kind of it's simple math. I hate to say it. It doesn't mean it's easy, means it's simple. It's when their story or perceived value of what they're going to get out of it, right? And what winning looks like, predictably, okay? Does that exceed their perceived risks and fear of failure? In other words, what they perceive they're going to get out of the business, if it's bigger than the perceived risks and fears of failure, deals happen. When it isn't, deals die. Any questions or feedback on that, or observations people have had when they're working leads? I'll keep moving on. This is, again, a little rehash, things you'd have seen before. Now, another complexity that have been introduced in the franchise over the last 10 years is how much more self-directed the franchise buying process before. So Christian said, you've said it before, but it just hits home for me more this time around. Thank you, Christian. So when I started franchise development going about 40 years ago, we would put an ad in the Wall Street Journal or USA Today on Wednesday, Wall Street Journal on Thursday. And the critical path was lead. They would call in, we'd get the call, we start working the lead. There was no self-directed research. So we're not websites. I remember we used to do these sessions about 30 years ago, whether or not franchisors should have websites or keep using those stupid stair-step brochures that we used to hand out in the trade shows. Websites were a big controversy. Now it's, nobody uses paper, right? It's all electronic. And the big controversy now, if maybe controversy is too big of a word, I think the problem we need to solve for is the self-directed research piece, right? So we know because we design websites, when the information was more trackable than it was before, a franchise buyer, we had talked about this before, would come to our sites, 18 visits on average, and spend 3 hours on the site. And then with what's interesting is now 80% of the leads are coming in by the phone, and you're hearing more design work going to what they call now is a mobile first design strategy, as opposed to you design for the desktop and you make it mobile responsive, right? So with mobile first, think about what the design components are. It's more graphics, a little bit more video. So it's more pictures, more tables, simple tables that people can read and they can scroll down, right? But what they don't get is story as a general rule. And now, when we went to a mobile first design strategy, I did that for about a year and a half. Our conversion rates, I'm going to define conversion rates by the number of users or visitors that go to our site that fill out the form. I'm going to call that a conversion. Our conversion rates dipped down to about the 2% range, which is kind of my minimal acceptable performance. I like to see 2.5% or better. And they were less engaged or less likely to get an appointment because we had held back on content, right? So we, about a little over a year and a half ago, went back to doing designing for the desktop and laptop, and then making it responsive for mobile, and then going still heavier on the information. And the last site we launched, which was, if you guys want to see it, it's called Perfect Skating. It's a really interesting hockey specialty training camp type concept that came in from Canada, was designed by a Stanley Cup coach, Stanley Cup winner. And the site's converting in that 3 to 4% range now, right? The national average, I'm told when I go to these conferences, a lot of franchisors expect the conversion rate to be 1% to 1.5%. 2% is my failure number. But I like to be in that 2.5%, and we have sites that convert as much as 5% that we're managing right now. Now, so what the moving target is how much of that brand story do you tell online, and how much of that brand story do we hold back? Okay, and then incorporate it to their process. I would tell you the answer is nobody knows, right? I will tell you, Google's done quite a bit of research on what they call high ticket, highly emotionally engaged or identity type purchases. So things in terms like automobiles, people really identify with their autos, and high ticket, big screen TVs, houses. Do you guys remember what Google says, how much of those purchases are self-directed? Put that in the chat bar. You can remember. Take a shot at it. I'm not going to ostracize you. I'll be gentle. 80, that's great. So, Christian, very close. So, Google, last I read, was 70. So, very good. So, in other words, most of the buying decision is already made before they engage. Now, nobody knows, because there's no primary research as relates to how much of a franchise opportunity the buying process is self-directed. I will tell you, if you believe Google, it's moving towards 70. I will tell you it's moved since I've, over the 40 years since I've been doing this. I tell you, we design, depending on the concepts, to 30 to 50%. So how I picture it in my own head, like the model I use when I'm designing, it looks like this. You ever see like a detailed business plan? And every business plan has a good, solid executive summary, and then they put the details in the back. I think of the website as the executive summary of my business plan, and then the process is the details I put in back. They kind of give you a model that we use to think through. But I will tell you, the executive summary portion is how well you summarize your brand story will determine whether you or not you actually get a conversation. So content earns conversation. And what's critical for me, and the reason I got into digital and content creation, as a development officer, is because I could see the content being produced by the ad agencies. I'm going to call it the consumer guys, right? So the consumer guys are trying to recruit franchisees with the same tactics, techniques, and worst of all, would be the same writer's voice that they would use to sell a cupcake or tires or a pizza. And it doesn't work when you're trying to sell a $500,000 investment, right? So we go to a more expository, which is factual, journalistic style. If you believe journalists are factual, I'm not going to debate you on that. Let's say they used to be, at least, right? But more of a factual, expository based kind of writing. Just the facts, man. You guys remember Dragnet? Are you guys old enough to remember Joe Friday? Or at least see the Dan Aykroyd version of that? Yeah, so it's just the facts, man. Just the facts, right? So that's how we write on websites, and that's how we engage people in the process. Any questions on that? So, what is your brand story? So this comes from one of our design documents when we're starting the process of flushing out value and brand story, right? So we start with what business are we in? What are the products and services, and drill it right down to the consumer value proposition. How this thing gets started, company history. Depending on the size of the company, so merging growth franchisors and startup franchisors, they're really buying the leadership, right? Because they don't have the track record of proof of concept often as a franchise opportunity. So they want to know who's leading this thing, and have they done it before, right? So management bios become really important. Culture of the organization becomes really important. I'll give you an example. We work with Mountain Mike's and have been doing lead generation and helping them with recruitment now for 7 years. And recently we just started bringing in crumble cookie franchisees, and we start asking why. It's culture. So the culture of the organization has gotten pretty heavy-handed, and it's dissatisfying franchisees. Because is management trustworthy? What do they believe is the role of a franchisee in the business? franchisees, sharecroppers, or they strategic partners and stakeholders in the brand. So again, the ideal franchisee or relationships culture, I think, is part of the value. Why do customers do business with the brand? Kind of, we touched on the consumer value proposition. I don't have to read it all the way down here, but you can kind of see if you flush out these in detail, and maybe there's more, but that will start giving you all the elements of your brand story. Paul put out, how important is brand story versus AUVs? I would say it's the same thing, Paul. So investment, sales, ROI, to the extent that's in your item 19, we pull that information forward. We put it on websites and downloadable content. So leads that we're generating for franchisors will actually have the item 19 information even before they speak to a recruiter. So great question. Thank you for asking that. So I'll stop there and talk about theory, and then we'll get into execution a bit. We'll do a little bit of a case study, and we'll show you some things that we've done. So, anybody have, like Paul, questions on kind of overall concept, overall brand story, the beginnings of how to lay out a process? So when we're designing, I'm going to say we get all the brand story elements on the table first before we do any design work, right? And then we look at the overall value of the business and overall components of the brand story, and we make decisions from there. We'll say which part of that brand story belongs on the website, what belongs in downloadable content, like a second round maybe of privileged information, and which content or brand story elements actually is better being discussed in a conversation during the process. And that's kind of how we sort it out. And then I like overlap too. Like we may hit something highlighted here and drill down there, because adults learn through repetition. So I do think the most saleable and your greatest value, I would go to the well with multiple times until the candidate could repeat it back and it's front of mind, which adult learning experts would tell you maybe hitting your highest value point 6 to 8 different times before it's really drilled down and becomes front of mind. Questions on that or feedback? Because a lot of times I'm working with clients, I should say, we're doing design work, and they say, well, there's a lot of repetition. And I'm just like, yeah, there is a lot of repetition. This is a lot of good value. We want to make sure it doesn't get forgotten. So don't be afraid of repetition. So we'll get into a case study a little bit. So we brought on this concept. It was a franchisor. Was bought out by a private equity firm. They're based in Baltimore and Mid-Atlantic area. And then they decide they're going to start franchise again. They do about $110 million in wheel repair. What's interesting about this particular brand from a consumer side is they provide a service that and a specialty item that they're wired for, that auto body shops and large auto repairs and dealerships really don't like to do or aren't set up for it. So let's assume anybody have a car and it's got like a wheel rash on your rims, or crack a rim, or the wheels get bent or messed up because of an accident. Mm-hmm. So to repair a rim, or replace a rim, I should say, or repair is minimum $600, but probably closer to $1,200. It could be as much as $2,000, depending how bougie your car is, right? And then what these guys do is they've got a patented system. Actually, I should say it's patented. I should say it's more proprietary system. They have these mobile painting and repair booths that they bring into the dealerships and the auto body shops, like a route. They take the rims and they paint them, and they fill in the cracks. and then they bake the paint. And when they're done, you can't tell it was painted. It looks like you have aluminum alloy, and it looks pretty much factory new by the time they're done. The whole process takes an hour per wheel, and they get it done for about $150 a wheel, which is far less than the $600 to $1,200 replacement cost. And there's plenty of room for the auto body shop or the car dealership or the auto repair place to add a pretty healthy margin for themselves. So it's a great little niche business. I like intellectual property businesses. In other words, to compete with me, you got to know what I know. And this is just something that they've perfected. It's really interesting, and there's not a lot of people doing it. And for those of you that don't know the automotive industry, there's more cars on the street right now than any other time in U.S. history. And also, and used car margins are almost at an all-time high. They were an all-time high during COVID when the chip manufacturers weren't developing the chips for new cars, so everybody had to buy used cars. It increased the used cars exponentially. The prices have come down slightly, not much, and demand has come down slightly, not much. But that's a big part of it, So because the margins are so high, the dealerships are trying to, as part of the detailing process, they're fixing the road rash on the rims so their cars will sell quicker and at a higher price. So it's a great little business for the consumer. It's great for the wholesaler, being the auto body shop, and its margins are fantastic for the entrepreneur. Cost of a technician is about 30 to 40% of sales. And Bryce, what's the cost of product? I mean, what, 3%, 2%, something like that?
Yeah, it's pretty low.
Yeah, so huge margins. So we sat down. Bryce was part of the equation. We said, okay, well, what's the value they're bringing to the table as an investment opportunity? We came up with really 15 reasons we should really drill down on, right? So it's a low entry cost business. We're working out even financing where if the franchisor does a remarketing agreement, somebody can get into that business for about 50 grand. And within months, they're doing 200,000 in sales at let's call it 60% margins plus maybe I guess we take the royalties out of that for an owner operator. So so it ramps up very, very quickly. It's mobile, right? So low entry cost. There's no fixed real estate. Recurring revenue. It looks like a break fix model, and it is, which I normally don't like a plumbing where you got to wait, or computer repair, you got to wait for somebody to call you, because we're dealing with the car dealerships that this work is coming in all the time, so that there's enough cars on the road with enough need where they show up and they might be doing 5 to 7 wheels a day per stop, okay, which is about the capacity 7 to 10 wheels in a particular day. It's unique, and for me, it's also defensible in the marketplace. So once I learn it, okay, and I'm doing my route, okay, and I've got my customers in place, there's not a lot of competition that can dislodge or drive a wedge. So as long as I do minimal acceptable performance levels and minimum service levels, whatever that means to the particular client, I should have that client forever, or certainly long term. It's cost effective, so it's actually better than replacing a wheel and a rim. There's long-term sustainability. There's nothing that's like, people aren't going to be riding on like the Jetson cars where they're riding on air, right? So it's wheels, and that's what people are going to be riding on well into the foreseeable future. It's not going to be affected at all by electric cars or any crazy government mandates that might be coming down the pike. Really high margin. Most service businesses look for a 50% markup, or I should say labor cost. They're in that 30 to 40, so they're getting at least 10 extra points on other comparable service type businesses. It's all repeat business. You don't need sales experience. So that's kind of good for that more introverted, technical type of franchisee that has some sort of outbound sales reluctance. Sales calls, let me show up at the dealership who already has the need because the wheels are all messed up. And let me tell you what I do. And can you send me work? It's just a real easy kind of warm call and kind of easy close. And the demand right now is pretty high. So it's easy to find new business. And we can kind of go on from there. Bryce, did I miss anything or anything that you can kind of add by going through the process of establishing value?
No, you hit on. I mean, these 15, we obviously took some time to make sure that we were concise with this, but it's clear as what any basic franchise candidate wants to check in terms of those boxes.
And it's also highly scalable, which we're going to talk about. The average franchisee is not a technician; they're running $1 million plus business, which means they've got 3, 4, 5 technicians on the road. Now, I described the value. Okay, we're going to do an interactive exercise. Okay, so in the FPG intellectual property, we have about 10 buying personas. We call them buying archetypes of people who buy franchises. Now, these are not perfect distinctions. So people can occupy 1, 2, maybe even 3 different archetypes, but it gives us, our content producers, kind of a way to think through who would be a good fit for this business. So based on what I just told everybody in the business, you guys have a lot of experience. Who do you think will attract? Who should we target? Who would find value in what I just told you? So we have the empire builder, which is something looking for somebody, high margin, repeat, highly scalable business. They want to take down a metro area. The serial entrepreneur who might be like the empire builder, but I'll say less formal business training and more intuitive and fly by the seat of the pants. First or second generation immigrant entrepreneur. The youthful. When I started franchising, when I was in my early 20s, I remember I had a boss one time, and Paul Pichelle, Leslie, right? Leslie knows him, who told me I suffered from the curable disease of youth. I just had my 61st birthday. He was right. I'm cured. Active retirement. So people are looking for maybe a senior side hustle, return to work, where the spouse, the kids are now out of the house and they can transition back into the workforce, retired military. You can kind of see the own, or the passion player. In this particular instance, passion player would be, somebody who has a love affair with the 65 Mustang, right? Or is a gearhead, right? So based on that, who would you guys say we should target with our value? Put it in the chat box. I know it's limited information, but I'm taking you through our process of design. Empire builders, young guns, passion players. Bryce, very good. Bryce, you're cheating.
What can I say?
Bryce already knows the answer. Okay, Bryce ruined it. We can all, anybody, now I'm going to use the chat box. Everybody, if you want, can go hate on Bryce because he just ruined the interactive exercise. So anyway, and Leslie, that's right. It could be any all. So what we try to do in our design work, not like it's right, but we try to focus on 3 personas. Because if we go too broad, sometimes we get too generic in our content creation. So what we try to do is kind of focus on 3. So the 3 we focus on, thanks, Bryce, would be empire builders. Okay, why? Because it's so scalable, scales so quick, repeat business, high margins. Even though it's a $110 million company, there's plenty of blue sky and green grass in large metro areas somebody can take down at scale. And there's huge demand for what we do. So empire builders, young guns, we're going to go after the youth and carve out smaller territories. Why? Because you know how like there's entry level jobs, but anybody's been around franchising for a while. How many entry level businesses are there that where you can make it on piss and vinegar and hustle instead of business acumen and experience? Yeah. So this happens to be one of those. So we're going to advertise and young guns, and then the passion players, because that does seem to be a common thread. You know, like their ideas of a good time is go hang out in the garage and go turn the wrench on, you know, whatever souped up hot rod or antique car that they got in the garage. I should also say it's a very male dominated culture and very male dominated type business. So we're going to probably recruit because it's a dirty business and it's men calling on men. We're going to target men. Not that you can't be a woman and do well in this business. You just don't see them in this particular business. Questions on that? And then I think by default, just by focus on the three, we're going to get retired military. We're going to get the first-time business owner because it is more entry level. And we'll get the serial entrepreneur because it's a niche business. But that's not who we're going to specifically target. So before we get into the design work, any other questions or comments? Okay, then I'm going to keep going. Now, we talked about before that if you go back a few slides, right? The self-directed buyer journey, that most of the people are getting most of the brand story from the website. And, right? And then I tell you, we design for about 30 to 50% of the entire brand story being giving away on the website. I like downloadable content because I use that to incentivize form fills. Okay. And then also to drive people deeper into the funnel with more privileged and detailed content. We do it in the form of a PDF, like an ebook. Our ebooks are usually 20 to 30 pages long to give you an idea of depth of the information that people are going to get. But first place is the website. The website, we talked about kind of the executive summary of a business plan, right? Is kind of the way we think about it. And I said we design for the laptop and the desktop and we make it mobile responsive. So we have a deep research funnel, so this way, so we like this kind of a cool image. This website just went live, about a week ago, Bryce?
Yeah, it's been about a week officially.
Yeah. So, if you put in alloywheelfranchise.com, you'll get there. So you can see about Alloy, what's the typical day of a franchisee, size of territory, training support, profile, special franchisee, and it keeps drilling down. Franchise information is more deep dive, which would include the item 19 information, which we're still working with the attorneys and the accountants to put together. FAQs. So I like an FAQ section, and I basically it's what are all your objections. So one of the things I probably should have put out there, when people tell you no, what do they say? Because if they're telling you no, think of how many times they're telling themselves no before they ever get to you. So what I do is we design FAQ sections really to handle objections. So we'll flesh out with that. And then I like brand stories, like what's new, what's different. So news and blogs could be anything like new consumer offerings, could be promotions. I'd like to do a lot of franchisee testimonials in the blog section, which is kind of interesting. I don't do heavy video. I'll tell you why. We found across, I've worked with 150 different brands now. We found across the board that the videos don't get watched until somebody fills out a form. Which is really interesting. So we find and I don't have a reason for that other than I think they think the video is a commercial, and I think they think they're going to get pitched. So until they get enough of the content where there's credibility and trust in the content, which is usually after they fill out the form, then they go back and read the blogs and go back and watch the videos. So Paul asked the question, do all different buyer groups do the same amount of research? Interesting. I would say yes, Paul, but I would say there's certain, it's not so much the buyer groups, the way I have them laid out, like there's behavior profiles, like let's call it the type A personality, because they're the real drivers. So they're very entrepreneurial. We all have them in our system. They will do a faster amount of research and they'll go more with their gut, and they might get and use less data than somebody who is very more cautious, more methodical, right? More detail oriented, but they're basically asking the same questions. They're basically on the same process. They basically move through the exact same phases. The typical buy cycle of a business, Paul, will be 60 to 120 days if the process is being managed properly. If financing becomes difficult, that might extend out to 150. So materially, it's the same process. Materially, it's the same buckets of information. What's different sometimes is the level of detail. Like that type A personality might talk to 2 to 4 franchisees and say, okay, I heard enough. Or a more detailed person might talk to 7 or 10. Leslie, if you don't mind, or somebody else too, how would you answer that question that Paul asked?
I'm sorry, I was paying attention to something else. What is the?
Oh, no worries. It could anybody. So Paul's asking, do the different buyer groups that we presented, do they do the same basic research?
I would say, Joe, that I would say, Joe, that it would depend more on their behavioral personality
style,
profile, more so than what you're talking about there. More so than which archetype they would fall into.
So that would be my answer too. Thank you, Corey. So Paul, we use DISC, which is a 4-factor model of behavior, which has 4 basic behavior archetypes that are different than these franchise buyer archetypes that I presented. And that would be a better predictor of how much information they need and the pace of which they make decisions.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really different from one person to the next. Different people care about different things, and they're going to focus on different things. If they're getting the help of a good consultant, the consultant is going to be shaping, helping them shape due diligence and pointing, particularly with less experienced people, kind of help them figure out what they should be asking, which they may not ask on their own.
That's right. And then Corey asks, is the CEO of Alloy Wheel really named Rob Wheely? And the answer is yes. And I laughed out loud the first time when we took him as a client. That was my first point of contact. And he was also their largest franchisee, which is cool. All right. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Corey. And no thank you, Bryce. All right.
I'm used to it from you at this point.
Okay. So now, like somebody fills out a form, right? So in the FPG process, I'm going to call this all the buying process, because I would say your content strategy is part of your franchise sales process. And the big part, and I remember I was saying 30 to 50% of your franchisee recruitment process is going to be the strength of your content. So for us, we have a website, looks great. Reads well, expository. Writer's voice for me is mission critical. I can't tell you how much crap we replaced that says stuff like, you sink your teeth into this mouthwatering opportunity, or accelerate your career with Alloy Wheel. Not like that they did that, but that would be the kind of crap, I would have to recreate. Yeah. Put the pedal to your metal with Alloy. Like that's what we're getting from the marketing departments. That's what we're getting from the PR firms. That's what we're getting from the ad agencies. And then we expect people to shell up, $200,000, $500,000 with those taglines. And it's head scratching. But anyway, so they fill out the form. Now in our strategy, so we give a good summary on the website, which is after we generate the traffic, we move all traffic to the website. That's our call to action from the website, from the digital marketing. Now, this doesn't include brokers. Brokers would be a slightly different process. This is more digital driven. But even with a broker, we would then move the traffic to the website where they get the brand story. Okay, then they would fill out a form and they would get what we call level 2 content, which for us is a franchise information ebook. It's actually privileged information only people who fill out the form get. And that's what actually drives our conversion rates on our website from what everybody else has, which is 1 to 1.5% to 2 to 5%. Right? It's really the incentivizing that form fill, plus how we design and tell brand story, I think, has a lot to do with that. So now with Alloy, we put more content in the ebook than we do that's on the website. We do more of a deep dive, right? So this particular ebook, and if anybody wants us to send it to them, we'd be happy to do that. So you can go to the website and then know what a candidate would get when they download content, so you know what a candidate's going to get before they ever even talk to somebody like Bryce, and how much information is going to be in their hands. And that doesn't count other websites and reviews and other things, that research that they'll do before they talk to somebody like Bryce. But so about us, about the auto industry, the brand position within the industry, notes and stuff from the CEO, a good description of what the services that they're going to provide and what's the value to the customer. What's the customer profile look like, or this would be who our clients. A good deep dive on the startup costs. We'll add another page for the item 19 information and pull that forward into the ebook and on the website. Now that's what they're going to get before they even enter into the franchisee recruitment process that's facilitated by Bryce. So I'll stop there just on content strategy before we get into process design. Anybody have any questions on content as it relates to the franchise sales process? Okay, then I'm going to keep moving on. And Paul and I talked about, like, is the process pretty similar? And I would say this, regardless of the size of the investment, and regardless of the category, and having worked with 150 different brands, the only category I have not worked personally would be hotels. I've really boiled it down to a 6-step process as my starting point. Now we may modify and adjust from there. But the 6-step process, before even somebody enters the process, there's a pre-qualification call. And the whole pre-qualification call is real simple. 5-6 questions. Can they, do they have the bare basics that they need to be a candidate, be an approved candidate with Alloy Wheel? Now that's a 5-minute conversation. So when they enter the process and they'll set up a meeting, Bryce will conduct a good 30-minute interview. So it'd be, we ask at least 13 of the same questions and then follow-up questions to that for clarification or expansion. Now, our interview process would be equivalent to what somebody would get if they're applying for a leadership position with the company. We vet them. Right? Now, I will tell you, part of the service offering we have for franchisors would be mystery shopping. I've mystery shopped probably 200 franchise sales guys in the last 20 years. I have never, and our mystery shoppers have never been effectively interviewed. Not one time. Other than the self-serving pre-qualification questions like how much money do you have? What's your time frame for making a decision? I don't really call that an interview. We have not been matched. Like, what are your transferable skills? What are your relevant background? What are your objectives, and try to get them quantified and measurable, like stuff like Leslie would do and Corey does and Bryce does. That just doesn't happen when we're mystery shopping. So we do a really upfront, robust interview, and then we move from towards telling the brand story. We try to give them a line of sight using a pitch deck between who they are, what their experience is, what they're looking to accomplish, what their transferable skills are, and how this could all play out in the business and achieve their objectives with a high degree of probability. Now, after the first step, we don't know if they're a fit, and we don't know if they're going to buy. And we're not even going for that. We're going for cautious optimism. If I would cut open a candidate's head, I'm designing to give them this conversation. I don't know if Alloy is right for me, but it makes sense to take a deeper dive. Makes sense to look more. Makes sense to take the next step. That's what we're going for. So then, and then from there, once we have that, sometimes that step one might be, if it's a complex model, we might have to break it into 2 meetings where we get into the technical pieces, maybe in a follow-up call. But usually we can get that done in 1 60-minute to 75-minute conversation. Then they move to the FDD review. Now, I'd like to do the FDD review there, right? Because I don't want to tell them the rules of the game until they know what the game is, right? So, and what I'm trying to do here is I just go over the first 23 items, and we're just surfacing deal killers. Because if it's a deal killer, by definition, no matter where that occurs in the process, it will kill the deal. So we try to get those out up front. And at the same time, we work with the franchisor to eliminate deal killers in the FDD. A lot of times, the attorneys are writing these things and they're not really thinking practically about how these things play out in business. So a good classic example might be where a franchisor reserves the right to operate a competitive brand in the same trade area, serving the same products but under a different name. And I would ask for, why would you do that? Well, I don't know. What if they're out of compliance? Well, if they're out of compliance, don't you have other protections and default provisions? Well, yeah. So why would you do that? And and if you ever done it, I don't know anybody who's ever done it. So here's at the end of the day, I like to get those things yanked because they give the buyer agita. They're not buyer friendly. You can't mitigate that risk. So we like very practical FDDs where it kind of eliminates deal killers. I like them to be as franchisee friendly as we can. Then, because we're an outsourced FSO, we ladder them up within the organization. So we like to have them talk to leaders, either the CEO, COO, or could be other leaders of like training and development and that sort of thing. So and give them sign-off power, and we prep the candidate for those. And then we move them into franchisee validation. And then from there, discovery day. Discovery day is seemingly, all our clients are moving away from an event, physical event where they show up to more virtual. So that step 5 could actually split step 4 in half, because sometimes you plan these events let's say every 30 days. And while in a perfect world, it would happen when they complete validation. We're not always in a perfect world. If it's virtual, too, if somebody's kind of cooling off a little bit, a virtual discovery day sometimes could breathe life back into the deal. So I might take the process out of order, but that's a judgment call. So otherwise, where you're doing these linear steps in this order, okay. And then step 6 would be, are we doing business together? Now, deal pacing for me is a big deal. Yeah, if you take a lot of times I see like franchisors, the mistake they make is they really try to pump the franchise candidate up in that first call. Where I was telling you, like let's say you got to be at the top, right? Ready to sign is the peak emotional engagement level. A lot of times franchisors try to get them there out with the interview and the overview. Okay, but I've never been able to, me personally as a recruiter, I've never been able to keep that level of emotional intensity up for 120 days that we're showing you here. So I don't like to do that. I try to leave them after the first call, cautious optimism. Then they get the FDD. So I want them to leave. I want them to be engaged enough where if the FDD is a negative, that I've got enough in the emotional bank to make a withdrawal and not kill the deal, right? So I want to make sure that there's at least, if we're going to make a withdrawal, that's where we do it, right there. But I try to leave and coach franchisors where the FDD is a neutral. So I kind of flatten out there, get the deal killers out of the way. And then now I'm talking to officers. And the officer, the goal here is, this is who you'll be working with, and this is how they add value to your business, and this is how they mitigate your risk, right? So when they've talked to the officer of the company, now they're back on an incline, then they should talk to franchisees. Now, I'm pretty specific and strategic in the franchisees that I would want a franchise candidate to talk to. My litmus test is I want somebody with a similar background, so they have some background related to this, or the franchisee's producing what the candidate wants to produce. In other words, the franchisee is winning consistent with the candidate's definition of winning. So they can see how they did it and see that it's possible. Okay. And then, they attend Discovery Day where they get a much deeper dive on the business, maybe even a broader picture of, where the business is going and how they will participate and be along for that ride. And then we move them to decision, while they're at emotional high. So we try to pace it so they're at their peak emotional buying state when they're done with their research. So all there is to do is make a decision. So any questions or feedback on deal pacing? Or anybody want to talk about how they pace a deal? And then I'll move on. Yeah, and then I think there's content strategy that you need to be implemented even while the person's in place. Just don't rely on conversation. Conversations go into the ether and they disappear. I like to tie conversations down with content. So like when an FPG lead comes in, first thing I walk to you, we have a whole session on lead nurturing content. So I don't want to dive into it too deep here, but there's a 14-day automated campaign texting and emailing that goes out with the sole purpose of trying to create a conversation with some pre-qualification. So this would be what a text looks like. Then we have educational pitch decks and other content. In this particular alloy, we have videos on how to repair wheels because we want to make sure they know the how to get they understand what the process is, and if it's a technician like an owner operator, that would be their idea of a good time. In process content, I think is generic to other franchisors. We have content on how to read an FDD. We have a content on how to finance a business, the different ways people finance a business. We have content on how to validate with franchisees, pro forma spreadsheets that are zeroed out, so we're not violating any FTC issues, but makes it easy for the candidate to create financial models. We have franchise discovery day best practices and preparation guides, and it just kind of goes on from there. Okay, and then metrics. So if they follow the process the way we designed it, and we're skillfully executing, what do we typically achieve? With lead generation, a lot of people just want information, so the responsiveness isn't what it has been in the past. But we can usually engage pre-qualify 20% of leads. So if we generate 10 leads, we can determine 20% of those are buyer qualified and 10 will make it into the process. In other words, they'll meet with us and hear the brand story. Out of those 10 that hear the brand story, about 50% of those will apply. So, 100 leads will yield 5 apps. Then we see very little fall off through validation discovery day to the point where we're closing 20 to, and Corey, who's on the phone that you heard from earlier with who's working pliables for FPG. Corey, how many, 35% of your apps you're closing? 30, 33, something like that?
Yeah, it's about a third. About
Okay.
A third of the financial apps are closing.
Yeah, and that's even high for FPG. So we kind of budget to 20 to 25%. Which gives us about a 1% lead to close ratio as a blended rate. Now that's off of digital marketing. Broker leads would kind of come in were the applications received. So they're almost like a quasi applicant. So we would probably close more like 5% of broker leads. So questions on that or feedback? So that's the content we have today. How we design the process, that's our IP in a nutshell. That's what we produce on the level for our clients. So I'll just open the floor to anything you guys want to talk about.
I guess for me, this is a good session. I got a few gaps here that I can close in our process. So I've learned a bunch of good things here. I see a few opportunities for improvement.
Is this Christian? I can't tell who's talking. Is that Christian?
Yeah, it's Christian. Yes.
Yeah. Give me 1 or 2 gaps that you saw.
So one of them, I mean, I don't use my other executives in the process nearly as much, right? Because I'm one of the owners of the company. I tend to do a lot more of that. I don't sort of bring the others in maybe as much because I know they're busy, but I really do need to bring them in more, I think, to round out the people they talk to. That's one right off the top. And I probably want to change my nurturing campaign around for my my drips. I've got
Excellent
some around that. So that's been very helpful today. Thank you.
Excellent. Anyone else? Appreciate the contribution. Everybody appreciate the everything you guys put in the chat box. So let's just call it a day then. So I think this is a good session. Our next session is going to be the second Wednesday in September, whenever that is. I think that's 9/11 actually.
It is.
So we'll be meeting at 9/11 at 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'll have a recording of this session up on our website probably just after Labor Day. We are looking for some lead generation clients. So if you're a franchisor and you need good quality leads, I would like to take on 1 or 2 more clients before the end of the year. So if that's you or you know somebody, I'd appreciate a referral. That would be great. And then don't forget, pay it forward. So there's no money being changing hands for these sessions, but we do require you to do 1 act of kindness this week for somebody else. And even the new guys, Paul, okay, you're committed to doing 1 random act of kindness. Could be for anybody, stranger, it could be anybody in the office. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. It was good talking to you.
Thank you very much. It was really good.
And Paul, tell Edith where I was asking for.
Okay.
Tell her I said hello, please.
All right, sure.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Have a great day.